Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Join us today as we talk about the sad fate of one space robot. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another Advanced Studio Classroom. I'm your host for today. My name is Simon, and you are joining me for our August space article. It's called Challenges in Space. This is actually the third lesson of 3 days of space-related lessons, and joining me again in the studio, as they have for the last 2 days, are Manya and Jack. Jack, welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Simon. Yeah, my head has been in space for the last 3 days.
Now, Jack, over the last 2 days, we've been talking about saving ourselves from asteroids,
That's right. Yes.
Okay, and we talked about how there was this process that NASA, the American Space Agency, went through in deciding that along with the other parts of the U.S. government, they were going to start looking at the problem of asteroids that might bump into Earth and how they could protect us from that possibility. But when they were doing that, one of the first things they did was to try to collect information on the problem. We learned that they were cataloging all of these big asteroids in our solar system and charting their orbits so that they knew where they had come from and where they were going to in hopes of figuring out ahead of time if any of them were heading for Earth. Now, today, we're looking at a different kind of space data gathering. This time, not on an asteroid, not really out in space, but on our neighboring planet of Mars.
That's right. And they created a couple little robots. Well, they're not so little, but they're basically designed to be little robot geologists, we say. And a geologist is a scientist who studies rock and earth and the kind of formations or the layers of rocks. And so he's been up there. This robot has been up on Mars studying rock and earth on Mars. Yeah.
Now, Manya, welcome to you too.
Thank you, Simon.
Manya, today's lesson is actually titled Opportunity's Record-Setting Mission on Mars Appears to Have Reached Its End.
It's kind of sad.
Yeah, but I wanted you to help us clarify this use of the word opportunity. Are we talking about how this mission was an opportunity or the information it sent is an opportunity? What are we saying here?
No, that is the name of the robot.
Oh, that's the robot Jack was talking about.
Yes.
Okay, now they don't really call it a robot through this article, right?
Yeah.
They use this other word. It starts with an R. You know what
Rover.
that is? The rover.
Rover,
Yeah.
yes.
Now, you know, some of our listeners might be familiar with one type of car called the Land Rover. And so this term, it is a term that has other uses in English, but they all kind of have the same meaning. It means like a wanderer, someone who's traveling over the landscape, I guess you could say, exploring different things, right? And I like that term wanderer because that's kind of really the idea with a Mars rover.
Yes.
There's no roads. We don't know.
Yeah.
You know, it's just kind of wandering around up there, right?
Robotic wanderer.
That's right. But we find out that this craft, this rover, it has had, number one, a record-setting mission on Mars, and number two, that mission is over. Very sad, right?
Yes.
There we go. And so this is the tragedy of space that we are going to be talking about today. Listeners, if you have your Advanced magazine for August, you will find our first reading for this article on page 12. Let's get into that now.
Opportunity's record-setting mission on Mars appears to have reached its end. Halfway up the slope of a crater on Mars lies a small robotic geologist that won't wake up. The smart car-sized rover got caught in an epic dust storm that enveloped the red planet in June 2018, and it hasn't been heard from since. For several months, Scientists and engineers at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory have desperately sent more than 800 commands across 35 million miles of interplanetary space, imploring the explorer to reply with even the briefest beep. Then they tried something new, asking the rover to reset its internal clock in the hopes that that would help it recharge and wake itself up. But the robot remains silent. "We have pretty much exhausted our recovery efforts," said John Callis, project manager of NASA's Mars Exploration Rover mission.
Now, listeners, the language that is used throughout this article to describe the robot almost makes the robot sound like a little person. If you might have seen that movie Wall-E about the little robot, right? And this robot is very much described in language like you might use to describe Wall-E. You can even see a picture of the robot, in fact, on the top of page 13. It looks like a cute little thing. Right?
Like a pet.
Almost like a pet, but a robot. And so we're going to end up talking about this robot this way just because of the language here. And we find out in the very beginning of our first reading that this little robot is kind of stuck, sleeping, halfway up a slope. Now, when we say a slope, what are we talking about? We're talking about a
hill, basically, yeah.
Okay, so you can imagine this little robot over on page 13 slowly working its way up a hill and not quite making it, just kind of getting stuck and just lying there. Now, they use the terminology wake up. So they're not saying it's dead. They're just saying it's kind of in sleep mode, right?
Yes.
This robot. And so we say it's halfway up the slope of a crater. Now, we described a slope as being like a hill, but a crater isn't really a hill. No. What's a crater?
Crater is actually when we talked about asteroids, when something falls onto the surface, onto the planet, and makes an explosion, it'll dig out a pit into the earth.
Kind of like looks like a big hole, like a circle.
Yeah. Actually, now that I think of it, there are two kinds of craters. One is formed by volcanoes. So that would be like a mountain with a hole in the top of it. And then the other is formed by something hitting it, which would be like a flat surface with a hole dug out of it.
Okay, but either way, if you're trying to get into a crater or out of a crater, around the outside of the crater is kind of going to be like a hill kind of thing, like dirt that's been pushed up around the outside. And that is the slope that this little robot is stuck on. Now, this is a robot geologist. Jack, in the intro, you said that a geologist was someone who studies kind of the earth, rocks, and things like that. And this geologist won't wake up. But it's not tiny. This is no Wall-E robot, right?
Do you think it's Honda Civic size?
Well, maybe, because it says the smart car-sized rover.
It's
right?
smart car sized.
So that's
Smart
even
car size.
smaller than a Honda Civic, which we were talking about yesterday.
Oh, really?
Yeah, smart cars are maybe taller than a Honda Civic, but they are much shorter.
Wait a minute. Aren't we talking about smart, like smartphone here, or smart technology?
No, we're talking about a very specific brand of car called the smart car, which is what I think it's made by a German manufacturer or something like that.
Oh, they're those cars that are really easy to park.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
They're very short, but tall.
That's right.
Yes.
Oh, so it is kind of like a big Wall-E after all. That's wonderful. Okay. So nonetheless, this small car-sized rover got caught in an epic dust storm. Now, when we say something was an epic storm, what do we mean?
A really big storm.
Like one to write a story about. Usually we say, when we use this word epic, we're talking about like a really big story, right? And so this is a storm that you would want to write a letter to your mother about if you were caught in the storm.
Or make a movie
Survived
about.
it.
Almost like a legendary storm,
Yeah.
right? And this storm enveloped the red planet in June of 2018. Now, when we say it enveloped the planet, it basically means this storm was going on all over the planet.
Yeah, it covered the whole place.
So this is a huge storm.
Yeah.
And, obviously it was a storm that was fairly powerful because something happened to our robot during the storm. Probably got filled with dust or sand or some kind of other thing that messed with its sensitive little electronics. And now, as a result, it's just lying there for several months now. Scientists and engineers have been trying to change that. What are they doing?
Well, they've been trying to send commands and just trying whatever they can to see if it can respond, but it doesn't.
Okay, so while this robot is smart car-sized, it's not actually a smart robot. It's being remotely controlled, right?
Yes.
So the scientists are sending commands. They're telling it what to do, and it says here that they've been desperately sending commands. So they don't want to lose their robot.
No.
Right? They're trying different things like, can you raise your camera? Can you lower your camera?
Yeah.
Can you pick up that rock? Can you go forward? Can you go backward?
If you think about it, they probably spent so much money and time to send it, to make it and to send it there for it to not work anymore, I'm sure is very disappointing.
That's it. So they're sending all of these different commands, telling it, go forward, go back, turn, look that way, but nothing. They're not getting anything. Now, it does take a while to get these commands there. It's not, instantaneous because the commands have to travel across 35 million miles of interplanetary space. Now, what's the difference between space and interplanetary space?
Well, interplanetary basically means between planets. So we're talking about the space between Earth and Mars.
Okay, and we use the language of desperation again.
Yeah.
So they're desperately sending messages, imploring, which basically means begging the robot, the explorer, to reply with even the briefest beep. Like, make a beep sound. Make a beep sound. But nothing. The robot will not reply. So it tells us that they decided to try something new. Now, this is maybe pretty drastic. What did they decide to try?
Well, they asked the rover to reset its internal clock.
Okay, and so kind of like rebooting it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In hopes that that would help it recharge, its batteries, because you can see the little solar panels on it there, right? And wake itself up. Unfortunately, that did not work. The robot remains silent. And so the project manager of the mission gives us the unfortunate conclusion. What does John Callis say, Jack?
They have exhausted their recovery efforts.
Yeah, pretty much. So they haven't given up all hope, but they've exhausted their recovery efforts. There's not much more they can do for this poor robot. And so it looks like it's the end. But fortunately, this robot was very successful. Well, it was answering commands, right? A very successful robot. And that's what we're going to look at in the second reading today. It's under the title, One Hard-Working Rover. And we'll get into that reading now.
One Hard-Working Rover. Its name is Opportunity, and for more than 15 years, it has been traversing the Martian surface, driving more than 28 miles and sending back more than 217,000 images of our nearest planetary neighbor. Together with its twin rover, Spirit, Opportunity used the techniques of geology to show that in its distant past, Mars could have been a habitable planet, much warmer, wetter, and Earth-like than it is today. Spirit and Opportunity blasted off from Earth in July 2003, each equipped with the tools of a human geologist. They had high-resolution panoramic cameras that gave them the equivalent of 20/20 vision and an arm with a shoulder, elbow, and wrist that allowed them to reach out and grab any interesting rocks that caught their eye. The rovers reached Mars in January 2004, touching down on opposite sides of the planet. They were designed to last 90 days in the harsh Martian environment and to travel a total distance of 1,000 yards. Instead, Spirit covered nearly 5 miles of Martian territory over a period of 5 years, until it became stuck in the powdery soil of Gusev crater. Opportunity continued its explorations for another decade.
Okay, so we learned in the first line here what you told us during the introduction, Manya, that its name is Opportunity, the name of this rover or robot. And we also find out that it's been moving around for 15 years. Now, when I hear these dates and numbers, I always think, that's not so good. I've been moving around working for a lot longer than that. But of course, this is, not a person. It's not really alive. How long have you had your smartphone? Certainly not 15 years, right? So for a piece of complicated technology to keep operating with its batteries and things like that for 15 years, that's actually a pretty impressive thing. Now, what has it been doing for all of that time?
Well, it's been exploring Mars, which is such a foreign and unknown land. So that's why it's also very impressive that it has been on there for so long.
Yeah, and they use this word traversing the Martian surface. Martian surface, of course, just means like the ground, right? But traversing, that's interesting because the root word there is the same as for the word travel, but it's a little different. So when you're traversing something, I always kind of think of, we use the word wanderer to describe a rover, and that's what I think of, someone who's kind of wandering across an empty landscape, right?
I kind of think of the word crossing, too, like he's crossing over the surface of this planet. Yeah.
Definitely. But then we get to another number that doesn't seem too big, right, Jack?
Well, yeah, it says he's gone more than 28 miles.
In 15 years.
In 15 years. That's a very, very slow rover.
It's not too fast.
But I guess he's doing a lot of things along the way on the 28 miles. Yeah.
Now, listeners, I don't know if you noticed this. At the very beginning, I said we were going to end up using language to describe the robot like a person. And Jack has been calling the rover he for the last few minutes.
Did I really?
Noticed.
We can't help it. The language of the article leads you into it. So you're thinking of opportunity as a he?
Just the general, overall, general he.
I'll tell you what. It looks like a he to me, too, when I look at that picture. I look into its tiny robot camera eyes, and I think, he. It's definitely he. Now, it hasn't just been wandering around. It's been sending back pictures. And this, I suppose, is the real blessing of having a robot to do this, because basically this robot is rolling a few inches, taking a picture of whatever is there, rolling a few more inches, taking more pictures, and sending them back. So, this robot is basically examining every rock and stone and pebble on this 28-mile course it's on, right? So that's a lot of pictures, 217,000 images of our nearest planetary neighbor, and that's just making reference to the idea that Mars is the next planet to Earth, right? We find out, though, in the next paragraph that Opportunity was not originally alone.
No, it has a twin. It has a twin. Its name is called Spirit.
I was definitely thinking Spirit was a girl.
I don't know. This is an interesting thing because in some languages we have this idea of that some words have a gender.
Yeah.
And a lot of languages we do consider spirit to be like a female kind of gender.
I couldn't help it. Yeah. Spirit seemed like a girl robot to me. I was picturing a little pink bow up on top of the camera, but maybe not. Maybe not. So, together with the twin rover Spirit, Opportunity used the techniques of geology to show that in its distant past, Mars could have been a habitable planet. Now, yesterday and 2 days ago, we were talking about the risk of aliens. We were only joking about that, though. But this is important information if you are a person who is interested in aliens. Why is the word habitable so important for people who like aliens?
Well, because what it means is this is an environment that people where aliens could live on.
Yeah, you can describe your home as your habitat. Like the place you live in as your habitat. And so if something is habitable, it means you can live there, right? And so in the past, Mars might have been a place. It says it was much warmer It was much wetter and Earth-like than it is today. Now, today it's just kind of a dusty, rocky, we call it the red planet because it kind of has this red-colored look to it when you look at it from the sky. But it wasn't always that way. Okay, and so this is kind of the big scientific contribution from these rovers. Now, our next paragraph gets us into a little bit of the background. These spacecraft left Earth in 2003, and they were equipped with the tools of a human geologist. So what were those tools, Jack?
Well, it had a high-resolution panoramic camera that gave the equivalent of 20/20 vision. And note, actually, it says cameras. And that's why it says that it had 20/20 vision, is because basically it has two cameras that can kind of view almost like two eyes.
So when those cameras are in different positions, they can give you kind of a feeling of depth perception from the differences between the two pictures, right? But they also describe those cameras as panoramic. Monia, what's that mean?
That means you can get the... Oh, I don't know how to explain this.
You can like look all the way around.
Yeah, all the way
right?
around.
So
yes.
you might say 360 degrees around the rover. You can see everything that's going on. And I can only assume that the reason they did that was so that aliens would not be able to attack the rover from behind.
Of course.
But I'm kidding about that, of course, listeners. That wasn't what was going on at all. They just wanted to be able to survey more as they were traveling. It also had kind of an arm with a shoulder and an elbow and a wrist. So it was able to kind of move this arm around in different ways to reach out and grab interesting rocks that caught their eye. Now, that's another one of those phrases that makes it sound like a robot, right? Or a person. It catches your eye. It looks interesting to you. Okay, so the rovers, they left in July 2003, and it was a long trip. When did they arrive?
They arrived in January 2004.
Okay, and they touched down on opposite sides of the planet.
Wait, was that intentional? Do you know?
I think so, because that means they can cover more of the planet,
that
right?
makes
To
sense.
survey more of the planet.
And I know, actually, reading a little bit about this, these two rovers, is that they had a hard time finding what is a good place to land it, because they wanted to put the rovers in a spot where, one, it's a good level, safe place to try to land it, and also where it would give them a lot of opportunity to, like maybe the most opportunity to send the rover out. You know, if they put it in a spot where maybe it's flat, but it's gives them a dead end in all different directions.
So you don't want to run into like a cliff or a mountain or, you know, like you find a nice area, but it's surrounded by, you know, things that the rover can't drive across.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it is kind of car-like, right? And it's not using roads. So, you know, it's difficult terrain to cross. I guess. Yeah. Okay. So they reached Mars in January of 2004. They touched down on opposite sides of the planet. And they were not really supposed to last for a very long time. 90 days, only 90 days, because this Martian environment, Martian is the adjective that means like the Mars-related environment, is really rough. They describe it here as harsh. And so I guess the weather is bad, it's really cold or really hot, and that, you know, causes a lot of problems for technology, sensitive technology. And they were supposed to travel about 1,000 yards. So they both did way better than they were supposed to.
When you consider that,
Okay, so to review, Opportunity managed to cover 28 miles instead of 1,000 yards and managed to last for 15 years instead of 90 days, which is really impressive. Now, Spirit didn't do quite as well.
But still did quite well. I mean, considering it traveled nearly 5 miles, and listeners, just so you know, like 1,000 yards is less than 1 mile. So it was designed to go less than 1 mile, and it went almost 5 miles. So it went a lot farther than it was supposed to.
It outperformed itself by at least 500%, its expectations. So that's pretty good. Unfortunately, though, Spirit met a sad end after that 5-year period. Right?
Yeah.
What happened to poor Spirit?
It became stuck in some powdery soil in a crater.
Okay, and powdery soil, it just means it's, think like sand that's very, very small bits of sand. So it's kind of like flour you might use to bake a cake or something.
Yes.
It's very powdery, very easy to get stuck in that sort of thing. If you've ever tried to drive a car on sand, you know how easy it is to get stuck, right? And so that's basically what happened in this place called the Gusev crater, because, of course, we've mapped, though not in great detail, much of Mars, right? So there are places in Mars that have names, just like places on Earth. Opportunity, though, continued explorations for another decade. Well, that's it. Sad, right?
Yeah, but very extraordinary.
Yeah, so even though Opportunity may have reached the end of its service life, it will be remembered because of its contribution to science, right?
That's right. And who knows, maybe the next explorer to be on Mars will be a human foot.
Maybe.
Maybe.
And maybe they will find Opportunity and manage to wake it up.
Yes. Oh, wouldn't that
And then
be
they
great?
can traverse the planet's surface together at the speed of 28 miles every 15 years.
Now, that is a story worth writing.
That is a story, a sci-fi story. Listeners, that brings us to the end of our space article for August. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you'll join us for another Advanced Studio Classroom. But until then, I'm Simon.
I'm Manya.
And Jack.
Saying goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.